your stint at Melbourne, just talk about that for the audience, for those of you who are listening who don't know. Henry went and you signed up to play in the Super 15, so you actually left Sevens rugby. Is that right? And then you
Yep.
went down to play for Melbourne on a contract. Tell us about your
Yep.
experience there and any challenges you faced and what you actually now know or have learned since going through that experience.
Yeah, heaps. So at the end of 2017 or halfway through 2017, after the World Series finished, halfway through the year, I went on to the Under 20s World Cup in Georgia, played that, and then after that, basically went straight from there down to Melbourne. So I signed a 2.5-year deal with the Melbourne Rebels. I signed that really early on in the year, in February, which is rare. Like usually it takes a little bit longer for deals to happen in Australia, but at the time I was fortunate enough to have a number of Super Rugby clubs keen to check me out. And, you know, it's a really tough, like anyone goes through job applications and you got these jobs, like what's best for me? Like where's the best opportunity going to be? What's going to be best for my career? And I ended up falling on Melbourne. For the reasons that the two coaches at the time were really, really sold on me. The other Super Rugby coaches, they liked me. They wanted to get me in. And they're keen to have in their program. But Melbourne really stood out because they were like, we need you. They had a role for me. They said that we need you because of this, that, and that. And they said, yeah, like they had a definite role for me and I could see myself doing that. And I was like, sweet, that's where I want to be. I want to be under a coach that likes me and is going to give me a job straight away. So I went down there, and besides the whole fact of just like moving out of home at 20 or 19 and like changing cities, like that was a little bit tough, but not that bad. What was difficult was, and I'm not sure if you're aware, at the same time, the Western Force in Super Rugby were getting shut down. Mm-hmm. They were, I think, running at a loss for Rugby Australia, and they couldn't afford having 5 teams. They need to make 5 teams, 4 teams. So what ended up happening, it was becoming Rebels or the Force, and it was either or. And I had already signed to the Rebels, and I was like, oh my God, like the team that I just signed with could collapse. And I was like, what's going to happen here? So that was a bit, that was maybe quite uncertain, but they ended up staying. And what happened with the Force was they all lost their jobs. And as a kind of like a movement by Rugby Australia, they basically merged the Force and the Rebels together. And which is fine. But what happened was the squad of now, which was meant to be 30, maybe 35, became 60. So it was a massive team down there for the next year. But what was really bad was I lost the 2 coaches that signed me. And look, it seems like I'm making a massive excuses, but basically the 2 coaches that I had, they left, and we adopted the 2 Force coaches. It was like a merger or a takeover. It was really what it was like. So the first kind of like 3 months when I was down there, players were getting sacked, like Rebels players were just getting sacked. Staff were getting sacked. The Force boys were angry because they had to uproot their lives and come across. And it was quite messy, actually. It was pretty uncharted territory as well for Super Rugby. That had never happened before. Anyway, I didn't get sacked. I kept my job. And I was like, oh, head down, ass up. Let's get to work, and let's adapt to this new team, this new coach. But what I didn't know was that my role had also, like my job there, my role that was so clearly identified at the time, that left with the Rebels coaches. And I was left with a coach who I just didn't, I wasn't in his DNA. Like there's nothing personal about it. It was just, there was no room for me there. And I kind of could see the writing on the wall, but I was like, nah, like I'm here. I'm going to keep training. And there's a lot of good players down there too as well. And it just didn't seem to work. I didn't fit the mold for the team that he was looking for, and I never got an opportunity. And it didn't look like I was going to get my time to prove prove myself. And, I got offered a deal back at Sevens, and my head was in a bit of a bad way. I hadn't played for 6 to 7 months. I was a bit lost, and I took it. And I'm very glad I took it. But yeah, it was a really, really difficult time because I was just going through the motions, just training, trying to break into a team which I knew I didn't really fit into. And from a social aspect too, when you don't fit into that team and you're not playing with that team, you're just kind of this off cut. You're just like, oh, it's a horrible feeling.
Like the ring in feeling.
Yeah, it was. And the good thing about it was there was so many of us down there because it was such a big squad. There was literally 15 players that were in the boat like me. There was so many. So you had those boys you could rely on and could keep you kind of sane. But it was a massive hit to the ego. It was a pretty humbling experience, that's for sure. Everything until then had been pretty rosy, like I said before. And it was really difficult. And what I learned was your relationship with your head coach. It needs to be tight. I could be the best player in the world to a certain coach, but then I could also be the worst player in the world to another coach. It's all about their perspective. And that is literally like what it was. I just didn't, for example, the Melbourne coach really loved what I was going to do, or the New Force coach thought someone else could do it better or didn't want that style of player. And there was nothing much more to it. And I can't completely change my game because it's just not who I am. And that was kind of like the end game for me. So that relationship with the coach, one I found was really, really important. You need to go to a club where the coach likes the style of your play that you get along with. Not that I didn't get along with the Melbourne coach, but he just didn't rate me as a player. And then it also made me realize the cutthroatness of the business. It's a business. Like for a little while, you can kind of feel like, oh, rugby's not a job. You just train, or like it's just, I don't know, it's a fake job. But I experienced the cutthroatness of it. Like all of a sudden, I had gone from like really good 2 years with Sevens, heaps of contracts to nothing, and I was like, oh my god, what am I going to do? Am I going to go? I might have to go overseas to start my career again. Luckily, Sevens threw me a lifeline, and I could go back, but that was good to learn. That was good to learn from a young age that it could end really quickly, and unexpectedly. Like I definitely wasn't ready for my career to end then at 20. That'd have been ridiculous, but it could have. So for me to learn that has made me make really good decisions about what I'm going to do next, where, with who, but also keep my life outside rugby going a little bit faster. So my uni, what I'm interested outside footy, because one day I could fall on that earlier than anticipated. So yeah, the two big learnings was relationship with the coach is key, and understand the fickle and cutthroat side of the business to rugby, because your career can just stop very quickly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. When you were in that period of uncertainty, you mentioned there was those months where you felt lost. Was there anything you added into your routine to try and ground yourself in some kind of structure or certainty to keep motivated? Was there any particular tactic or strategy you used to keep yourself centered and grounded in that period?
I probably could have done that better. I was younger back then. My roommate was in a similar situation to where I was, and yeah, I think when I realized that the writing was on the wall, I may have thrown that towel in a little bit too early. I wish I could have woken up better every day and gone in a bit harder. I wish I could apply myself how I apply myself now back then, and maybe things could have been different. I don't know. That's it. Again, it was almost like a learning that I needed to do. I needed to feel that monotonous opening the door to training, going, oh, got another shit day of training, for me to realize, no, it's not. It was kind of like another retrospective thing. That makes sense.
No, it does, and I can see the themes here, between the Rio and Melbourne, and it just seems like these are really important and formative experiences for you, in terms of the
Mm,
player and person you now are. That it's almost inevitable
yeah.
to go through these, and you have to, and it's important to if you're actually going to grow.
Yeah, and I think a lot of rugby players do. I've just had a really like I've experienced some really high highs of rugby, and I've experienced really lows of rugby, then really highs of rugby, and then really low. I've had this kind of like crazy roller coaster of success and failure all in the space of 4 years, and now COVID's another bad one, and it's like it's constant. So that changing all the time of how you're feeling and what you're experiencing and how you're performing, it changes me every year, I reckon, as who I am.
And it teaches you resilience, and I suppose to not get too dependent on those highs. And when you're
Mm,
humbled by the lows, it's easier to do that and to sit in that more consistent and sustainable middle.
yep.
But in talking about the
Resilience is a
highs,
key
yeah,
word.
sorry, go on. Yes.
Resilience is, I think, that's got to be one of my key kind of like point of differences. I'm resilient. Like you kind of have to be in this job, and not everyone is. But yeah, resilience is key for any success.